Cash Elvis is sleeping still. He's in bed someplace. We're ready to go back to work, guys, and we got an amazing speaker having come up to talk to you. We're going to bring a great message to you just momentarily. In the meantime, a couple things I want to do. I want to thank Tim for videoing everything. So if there's anything that you don't get for the 40 people that aren't here, we're going to try to get this information to them. We are having lunch here today, and it's going to be served in a buffet format here, and then we're going to go see the King of Passion's home and studios, etc., etc. And I understand that we're able to secure that room again. So our jam session will start at 10:30 tonight. We only went till 1:30 last night. But you know what? How many of you were still up at like 12:30, 1:30, something like that in the morning? You're still jamming, having a good time. There's Elvis number 2. That was Kenny Rogers right there. You know, how many times will we do this, guys? I want to show you something that you do to yourself. How many of you last night looked at the clock and said, oh my gosh, it's 11 o'clock. I got to get back up at 6. And then you start counting. 11, 12. How many hours do I have to sleep? Oh my Lord, I'm going to feel really bad tomorrow. Then at midnight you start counting again. Oh gosh, now look at it. It's midnight. You say 12, 1, 2, 3, 4. Wait a minute, I signed up for that stupid thing. You said 12 in the morning. Well, 12, 1. Then 1 o'clock you say, oh man, I am cooked. I'm going to be really bad tomorrow. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to feel like death warmed over. I'm going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 hours of sleep. I'm going to feel so bad. Then you go to your room and you're so concerned about how bad you're going to feel you can't sleep. How many of you experienced that? Then you do the worst part of all. The alarm goes off, you wake up, you're like, oh, you feel good. Then you say, wait a minute, it's 5 o'clock in the morning. I didn't go to bed till 1. You start counting backwards. 5, 4, 3, 2. And I couldn't even say, oh, I got 3 hours of sleep. Man, I can't take this. I'm going to have a bad day. I see it coming right now. I guarantee you I got less sleep than any of you, but I didn't sit there and have that countdown. I said, I'm going to get up tomorrow and I'm going to feel good. You can do that. It's a choice. How you feel, how you act, where you go in your life is all about right here in your own mind. Ask Kenny Rogers over there. He closed the bar about 2:30 this morning. So y'all feel good and that's good. Did everybody get their message to Garcia book? Or anybody who did not? Okay, I want to make sure I got one to each and every couple. I want you to read this. I think you'll really enjoy it. You have to read it 4 or 5 times before you get it all figured out. But in the meantime, I love storytellers. You know what? When you turn your presentation, your script into a story, is when you start getting the results you deserve. And one of the greatest storytellers I've ever watched is a guy named Day2KabBenefield. He does not go through a script, he tells a series of stories. And today he's going to tell you about how to make your script into a story. If you would please, the king of cookware, Mr. Day2KabBenefield. That's Day2KabBenefield. Sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Robin asked me to talk about storytelling, so let's tell some stories. Now, I'm trying to figure out what to talk about exactly with this, but a couple of questions I got for you real quick before we get going. I mean, life is a series of stories. We all have them. I love telling stories, personally. We'll get into why in a second, but how many have heard the story about how Paul and I met? Oh, that'd be good. How many have heard the story that happened to me in a cave years ago? How many have heard the story about Kiki? Oh, that's that one. Okay. Lots of fun stories. I like to come up with some new material once in a while. Being a storyteller is an art. To me, I think the greatest storytellers are comedians. They have the ability to stand up, quickly identify with people, most of them without any props, just by a series of words, get people laughing and rolling and identifying with the silly things they're saying, and loosens things up considerably. Probably the greatest storyteller I've ever seen. I'll show you a real quick clip of this. So we do like this guy. It's only about a minute long.
Yep.
Dave Rowe knows all too well how it feels to have his home broken into.
Yeah, and see, that's what the problem was. Because I heard him first, I said, hold on. I said, hold up, wait a minute, something ain't right. Then I started on stage that doom, doom, doom. Bitch, I started to almost beatbox up in the closet. Oh, boom, boom. I couldn't do it yet because I couldn't die. I got court tomorrow.
I couldn't die. I got court tomorrow.
Some people just have it. Seriously though, if you really want to double your income, become a storyteller. There's so much more about stories. People love stories. They want to hear them, they identify to them. Hollywood was based on storytelling. How many here have a favorite movie? How many have seen that movie more than once? How many can recite most of the lines of that movie? Why? Something happens with stories that are really kind of interesting. I mean, most Hollywood stories are based on heroes of some kind. They've done something, they've captivated, there's a good ending or some kind of an ending, but it's something that's drawn you through the whole process. And it's crazy when you think about a story. We all have our favorites. Some movies are great. If you think about a story, for example, a movie, if the characters, you can't identify with them, the movie flops. And everybody has different favorites. I remember going to see Titanic. Who saw Titanic? Okay.
Too sad.
How many said that's one of the best movies?
I like
A lot
it.
of hands go up there. I was so bored of that movie. I started laughing at parts of it, trying to figure out why half the women in the audience was crying and wailing. And I was looking around trying to figure out what is happening here. For some reason, they identified with the characters. And enough people did, that became a box office smash. To me, I went to that movie going, I didn't think anything about it was believable. So it's going to hit everybody on different levels. And so, lots of different stories, lots of different types of things you have to tell. But what I'm going to talk about just real quickly in a couple things. I mean, yesterday, I was sitting here with the crew, and we're watching that Paul Harvey commercial. Anybody know where that speech is from? 1974. Paul Harvey, one of the greatest storytellers ever, did a speech to the National FFA. And they recorded that speech, and Ram Truck somehow found out about it, got a hold of that. And I want to take just a second, and I want you to listen to the story one more time. And I don't care how many times you watch this, it's still one of the greatest commercials ever. And it hit people all across because it brings back our history, it draws an emotion, and there's a real tie that begins to happen. We're going to talk about how that works after we watch one more time. I want you to watch. How many times do you see who the commercial's for?
Once.
Once, just at the very end. Just very quickly. Greatest, this, you know when this was aired? Super Bowl 47. Most expensive ad in the world. But it was the greatest, actually I was reading some of the statistics, what it did for Ram Truck, unbelievable. They sold more trucks for this commercial than anything they've ever done in the history of the company. Play the commercial one more time, just because I want you to begin to understand the feelings you get when you listen to it. It's just a series of slides.
And on the
That's all it
ages
is.
day, God looked down on his planned paradise and said, I need a caretaker. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to get up before dawn, milk cows, work all day in the fields, milk cows again, eat supper, then go to town and stay past midnight at the meeting of the school board. So God made a farmer. I need somebody with arms strong enough to wrestle a calf and yet gentle enough to deliver his own grandchild. Somebody to call hogs, tame cantankerous machinery, come home hungry, have to wait lunch until his wife's done feeding visiting ladies, then tell the ladies to be sure and come back real soon, and mean it. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody willing to sit up all night with a newborn colt and watch it die, and dry his eyes and say, maybe next year. I need somebody who can shape an axe handle from a persimmon sprout, shoe a horse with a hunk of car tire, who can make harness out of hay wire, feed sacks, and shoe scraps. who planting time and harvest season will finish his 40-hour week by Tuesday noon and then paying from tractor back put in another 72 hours. So God made a farmer. God had to have somebody willing to ride the ruts at double speed to get the hay in ahead of the rain clouds and yet stop in midfield and brace to help when he sees the first smoke from a neighbor's place. So God made a farmer. God said, I need somebody strong enough to clear trees and heave bales, yet gentle enough to yean lambs and wean pigs and tend the pink-combed pullets who will stop his mower for an hour to split the broken leg of a meadowlark. So God made a farmer. It had to be somebody who'd plow deep and straight and not cut corners. Somebody to seed, weed, feed, breed, and rake and disc and plow and plant and tie the fleece and strain the milk and replenish the self-feeder and finish a hard week's work with a 5-mile drive to church. Somebody who'd bail a family together with the soft, strong bonds of sharing. Who would laugh and then sigh and then reply with smiling eyes when his son says that he wants to spend his life doing what Dad does. So God made a farmer.
What emotion do you feel?
Pride.
Love, pride, passion, emotion of memories of farms and family. How many know a farmer? How many have had farmers in their generations through the past? I bet this commercial reached over 80% of the population in there. I don't care if you live in the city or where you're from, it reached a lot of people. And what happens, well, I know those people. What happens in a good story is you begin to affect the brain. And the series of things that happen in the brain changes everything.
Which one, the dog? Wow.
I mean, if you stop and think about it, it's probably, storytelling is the greatest form of communication and connecting. One thing Dave will tell you is, I'm pretty good at connecting with people, and I do it through stories. When I ask a lot of questions, it's to keep them on the storyline, keep them moving, to see if they're still with me. You see, when you tell a good story, it affects the brain. And I'll give you a number of reasons why. You can write these down if you want to. But character-driven stories, they produce something called oxytocin. Oxytocin, basically, it's a love hormone. How many have been in love before? When people do crazy things in love, don't they? It changes you. It takes you off the dead center. What you really need to do to your audience. If they're dead center and just grounded so much, you're not going to get them to move one way or direction, either one way or the other. You have to get them off center. And so if you can create enough emotion with your audience, that hormone gets released and they begin to fall in love with a number of things. The story you're telling, the product that you're talking about, the feeling that's coming along. I want them to fall in love with me. I want them to know I am their friend, I care, I want to help them dramatically, and I have some tools to do it. These stories will help do that if you can get them across right. Second thing they'll do, an emotionally charged story releases dopamine. You don't know what that is? That helps people remember better, for longer, and with much greater accuracy. When you can remember their favorite scenes in your movie, you can remember those a whole lot better than the graph you just put up with all these different things on the board. Am I right? Those favorite scenes, because you were emotionally attached to them, you remember all the different aspects. Busy.
James Bond.
My kids are had to take it off.
James Bond of cookware.
Also, the art of storytelling creates a powerful emotion. When you get that powerful emotion right at the arc of your story, it creates a hormone called cortisol. And what that does, it's something that's really interesting. It creates an emotional reaction with us, even when you know it's fiction. And most of the movies you watch, you know they're not real. Yet I don't know about you, but I'll cry at a movie once in a while. Even though I know it's not real. But they have mastered storytelling. You watch this, you get choked up, don't you?
Your pictures?
Yeah. Especially that little one. No, when you watch that commercial.
Yeah.
You do, because all of a sudden you're relating to all the farmer goes through to provide food for our table, the pride in our land and our country, and you begin to feel those things. As you feel them, it changes things in your mind, and it creates things in your body, and different emotions start to release. It's really interesting. What they say, when you can get those hormones to begin to release, it activates part of the brain that allows the listener to turn the story into your own. You begin to identify with the characters of the story so well that it becomes your own story, literally. And by doing that, it's kind of interesting. It's called neurocoupling. It's like Pandora. If you're listening to a story that's really good and it's captivated you, you're so in sync with that story, you can almost tell you what the next line is before they just split seconds, or what's going to happen just split seconds before it does. You're that in sync. And when you become that in sync, your audience now, believe it or not, you almost control them. Because you've got them so tied up in your story, the things you're saying, and they've become so captivated, they're following you along in every step. Not only are they following you, the direction you want them to go now, but they're also tying in with each other. So you don't just have one person following you, now you have groups of people. That's why it's so fun to get people on the closing side. If you can, get everybody together. When one person starts to pop, what starts to happen? Everybody starts getting on board, because now they're all on the exact same page. And the key in what we do is we've got an audience, we've got to get them all on the same page at the same time. A good story will do that better than anything else in the whole world. You can stand there and lecture all day long. You're not going to get anywhere. Your body is conditioned right now. It eliminates it. It does not want to remember cliche phrases and words. Because we're bombarded with those all day long. So your body just discards them. Your mind discards them immediately. But stories that affect you, that you can relate to, that you can get tied into, not only do you remember with great accuracy, but you want to follow along. I can't wait to read Ted's book. Ted's a great storyteller. I follow him on Facebook and the things he reads, and I'm just captivated by your mastery of words. You know the greatest storyteller probably of our day is, or our generation, or past generations? A guy named Walt Disney. A lot of us know other great storytellers, like Zig Ziglar, Dave Hurley. People that just have a mastery of words and are able to pull you into it. This personal connection, not only does it inspire emotions, but it also inspires actions. They'll follow your instructions, your audience will. You know, for example, how many here have a fear of flying? Okay, there's a lot of people. That's a very real fear. And yet it's so interesting. The chance of getting killed in a car is 1 in 114. The chance of killed in flying is 1 in 9,821. But the fear, because of stories we've heard, or the thought of it, overwhelms practicality. There's a movie that came out in 1976, I believe, called Jaws. How many are afraid when you go to the ocean of sharks? Oh man, a lot of us, most people. Do you know what the chance of is getting killed by a shark? 1 in 264 million. And yet everybody that goes to the ocean is doing this. Because of a crazy movie that just shook us to the core. Am I right? So when doing stories, how does it relate to what we do? How do we make stories in how we work and what we're doing with it? Stories not only create sales, but they create brand. For example, 1940s, how many wedding rings had a diamond in it? Less than 10%. But suddenly, they started mining diamonds, and they had a flood of diamonds, these diamond companies. Huge amounts of diamonds they needed to move. So they tapped into love stories and created commercials and ideas all about love. And love is the emotion that moves people the best. And because of that, now over 90% of all rings, wedding rings have a diamond in it. That's all since 1940s. They created a brand, they created a need, they created emotion, and because of that emotion, it created sales. We can do the same thing. Milk was the same way. I don't know about you guys, but I was doing some research. Most families didn't drink a lot of milk. It wasn't until World War II. They needed milk for the soldiers. And they got so much after the war, they couldn't figure out what to do with it. So they came up with great slogans like, milk, it does the body good. Actually, there's a lot of fat in milk. There's a lot of things that aren't great in milk, but they sold it so well, milk consumption in the US went up about 60%.
That's huge.
What's that?
That's huge.
It's huge. And so they do that with branding, they do that with a lot of things. Commercials, people. So a couple things about stories. I'll give you just a couple things we should work on. If you're going to be a storyteller, your story must be direct, it should be linear. There's something to go by linear. It has to have a beginning and an end. And it shouldn't be choppy. I know some people tell stories, and I go there and I cannot figure out where the story is going or where it's coming from because it seems to be coming from every direction. It's got to be in a sequential mode all the way through so that people can follow it. It needs to be a story that a 5 or 6-year-old can follow. That make sense? Because if they can follow it, anybody can follow it. So it doesn't have to be complex, it doesn't have to be hard, but it has to be linear and something people can actually follow. Make it visual also. As you're telling your story, see it in your mind. If it's about a person, if it's about a kitchen, if it's about whatever it is, make it visual. If you can make it visual in your mind, you can tell the story much easier because you're describing what you're actually seeing. Also, know the purpose of the story. If you're just telling a story to tell a story, you're kind of wasting their time and yours. Make sure there's a purpose to it. And in our business, that's easy. I'll give you a couple hints to how to do that here in a second. But make it have a purpose. And also, when you tell a story, tell it like you talk. I see so many people, when they're telling a story or they're going into a close, they turn into a whole different person than they were during the demonstration. It should be the same. Same type of person, same characters, same tonal quality, same pace that you've been doing. Tell it like you'd normally talk to a person. Make it a conversation story. So make sure you're doing that right as well. Yeah, because there's stories, if you tell them right, they're going to connect information to emotion. And that's the real key. Because we have a lot of information we're trying to give out. But if you're just giving out information without getting it to an emotion, it's just that, it's just information. You really don't get a lot of buyers. People have to buy through emotion. I don't care what it is. And it's not a bad thing. You know, anybody tells you, well, you tricked me into buying it. No, we're not tricking you into buying it. We're just getting down to the core. And if you get down to the core, it creates emotion, and emotion moves you to buy.
That's the only thing.
Yeah. Yeah, if there's not a need, there's not a, you know, all of that has to come with it. It doesn't work. So you want to take your audience on a journey. So figure out what your journey is, what your stories are going to be, and go on through it. Now, how does that relate to what we do? Well, everybody's going to have their own stories. I'm not going to give you the stories. I have my own stories. Stories about me, stories about my customers, stories about all kinds of things. So you're going to have to come up with your own stories, but come up with them. When I say, well, what kind of stories? Well, there's stories about cooking and feeding a family. It might be your family, it might be a story you've heard of another family, a customer's family, anybody else, but get a story in there that has real life, real meaning, beginning to end, and will create an emotion. Because people will identify with that. They're going to now think about their kitchen, their family, what they're doing, how they like to cook, and it'll create what you want it to go with. Stories like on health stories. It could be through testimonies, it could be through your own personal feels, it could be, I don't care if you make one up. A story is a story. Make it believable. But if you'll tell a story on health and the benefits or the downfall of what's happening and that people can understand, when we go back to that video, all of a sudden it brought it back to kind of some of the roots and things we've kind of lost touch with, didn't it? When you go back to health, you can do back to the same thing. We've lost touch with taking care of ourselves, taking the time for your family, taking the time to get around the table. You know, those kind of things can become amazing stories, but tell them as a story. Don't just throw out a cliche. We need to be around a family. Family needs to be around the table. Blah, 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 blah. That's going nowhere. So make it in a story form. Stories about time issues. Stories about damaging our environment. You can do stories about, you know, from life-changing testimonies you're getting. You can tell personal stories. Our price conditioning is a story. A series of stories, and they better be good ones. Or when you throw out the prices, they're all going to go, what? Where'd that come from? If you tell that story really good and you do your price conditioning through stories really well, that makes sense. It doesn't blow people out of the water. They're not just all setting the clipboards down and leaving.
Pat?
Yes?
Can you do a quick 60-second of your price conditioning story?
Sure. You know, I use kind of some of the basic ones, but very simple. I mean, in every demonstration I have, if I don't have a testimony, I've got Mary. Mary was here a few days ago, or earlier today, or whenever you want to make it up. But Mary bought a set of cookware, you know, 45 years ago. I had to ask her, what set did you get? She goes, well, I got that small set. I was in high school. I said, I bet you got it for your Hope Chefs, right? She goes, yeah. She goes, I said, what'd you pay for it? Oh, she goes, oh, my dad said I was crazy. Really? Why? She goes, well, it was expensive, but you know what? I showed him. Mine still looks as good as yours after 45 years. And it does, too. I hear that all the time. I said, what'd you pay for it? She goes, $500. I said, yeah, that's about right. So that was a lot of money back then, wasn't it? She goes, yes, it was. She goes, that's what my dad's Chevy was, $2,500. I said, what's that new Chevy cost today? Yeah, $25,000, $35,000, $45,000. Did pretty good on that investment, didn't you? Think about it. That set was $500 back then. 45 years later, that same set with inflation should be what? 45,000? All right, 4,500. You know, do the math. Pretty simple. Do you understand where we're going with this? People are starting to identify with that. I said, relax, it's not that bad. The good cookware's never been cheap. Go to a good store. How many have been over to Williams-Sonoma? And I started asking questions who've been there. You check the prices of that stuff. I hold up my all-flat pan. I'm showing them the brochure. I'm walking through the story. Remember going to the mall? Remember picking that stuff up? Remember looking at those prices? It's good stuff. Make sense? So do it in a story type of form. I do a lot of stories in my show. I probably do, my demonstration is longer than most people's because I tell more stories. But I want them to relate with me. I want them to get on the same page. I want them to think what I'm thinking. And that's why I'm asking a lot of questions. I want to see if they're with me all the time. And if they are, that's what they do. They buy. Because they understood it, the emotions were brought out, they were able to understand the story enough that it brought them along to the point I wanted them to be, so they're ready to buy. And they're filling out their forms, and we're closing sales, and they're tickled to death. And the weirdest thing is, they're back next year. Not just to buy, but they're looking for that emotion again. I cannot tell you how many times a year, every seat in my audience is filled with my customers. Way too many. That's why I'm leaving California. I gotta find some new blood. And they're coming back, and I realize they want to hear the same story again. I do the same demonstration every time. And the same stories, and the same everything, and they don't care. They sit there, it's like watching the same movie over and again. It's like their favorite movie they come back and watch again. It really is. And they're super excited about what they bought again, and they go back out so they just got a refresher course and they're ready to go. If you've done a good job, they just keep coming back, man. It's just like it's a rerun. Crazy. Question?
Earlier we were talking, Dave was talking about emotional liars, rational liars,
Yes.
logical liars. Do you find that stories kind of transcend?
They will transcend, yeah. Emotional liars, rational liars. You've got to get them all on an emotional level at some point. And those who sit there with their arms crossed and looking at me are my very favorite, because I know I've got some work to do. And you have to work with them differently and more delicately, but you can bring them along in a story. Because they'll listen, and I'll start asking them questions that I think they'll identify with and make them part of the story. I mean, most of the time when I get people like that, they always become my chefs. And they always do it reluctantly. But by the end, they're the most excited people in the show. Because you start to break down the barriers just through stories and emotion and bragging on them and helping them feel the way you want them to feel. Make sense? So become a storyteller. Bring your audience on the journey. Don't be a lecturer. I mean, one of the hardest things we have is we do have a ton of tools. But if you've got in your booth and you've got a bazillion signs up, basically you're telling everybody, I'm a really bad storyteller, so just read all the propaganda and buy. If you're going to show something, do it one at a time. Make it part of your story and put it away. That make sense? Because if you get all these things
my camera too. I think someone knocked the plug out back
they're
there.
reading this, or trying to understand that, they're seeing this, or doing this, and they're not focusing on the story you're trying to bring them through. You're going to lose them. So you have to be the real focus on this. And when you're telling a story, the only difference between me and you is not I'm better than you, or you're better than me. As a storyteller, we're all need to be on the same page. So don't be afraid to come out into your audience and talk to them. I do that quite a bit, actually. I'll come around and start talking. You know, I'm not afraid to give them a little touch as we're going. It just kind of connects us. But I'm watching to see who's nodding, who's with me. For those who are doing this, I'm bringing them back in, trying to get them into the story. I'll call them out by name and try to start including them in the story we're working on out there. So make your demonstration a series of stories. Does that make any sense? Now it takes some work, because you've got to think, okay, how do I make making these vegetables a story? You can do that. Make it a fun story.
Camp, we got a lot of new people here today,
Yes.
right? And they're struggling just to learn the script. So to present something like this is like mountainous.
Yeah.
How would you say they start? You know?
Well, I tell people, learn the script as a story. And that's really what it is. Basically, you've got the story on how to do your vegetables. You've got your story on how to do your chicken if you're doing chicken. You've got your story on how to make a wonderful salad. You've got your story of your beater pans. You've got your story through transition. You've got your story of your prices of your cookware. I mean, introducing cookware. You've got your story of your price conditioning. You've got your story of your clothes. And then you've got your story of your post-close. So it's a series of about 9 stories in there. Does that make sense? So as you're doing your script, break it up into segments. Take those segments and think about how you're presenting it and how you can make it a little more of a story form. Start working on one segment at a time. I wouldn't do it all at the same time. It'll bury you. In fact, that's how I work on my script. Even to this day, I will go into every show I do, every day, and go, okay, what part am I working on today? Or what can I'm going to try tweaking this area today. And I don't try to, when you come to a conference like this, it's really hard, because you'll come home with like 15, 18 different new ideas. And if you try to do them all, you're just going to go crash and burn, and it's really ugly. So take the 14, 15 things you learned from this conference, and try to apply 1, maybe 2 per show. And just work on those till you feel really good. Because at first, even those 1 or 2 are going to be uncomfortable. That's why you have to practice it. And really work on where should I implement it? How should I implement it? Is it going to be part of my story? What's the purpose of it? Am I going to get the results I'm looking for out of it? And keep practicing that. And you just keep doing this until you become good at it. Then add something else. And then add something else as you go. That's just my advice for the rookies. Because I still do that. I'll work on one or two areas that I just feel like, that's just not quite what I'm looking for yet. And they're little tiny tweaks. There may be a 1 or 2 words difference, or a phrasing, or a voice inflection, or movement. Because once you get to a certain point, you're not worried about the script. You're just concentrating on your audience. You're watching their reaction all the time. And sometimes I'm not getting the reaction at that point I'm looking for. So I'm trying to tweak to get that reaction I want. Make sense? So become a storyteller, a great storyteller. Practice, 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 practice telling stories. Everybody loves a good story. So let's talk about Kiki. Some of you know I was a youth pastor for a lot of years. 1984, I put together a choir doing a whole production of junior high kids. And we had 89 kids in this choir. And I thought, who can we perform to? I used to live in Idaho. My ex-wife was part of a church there, and they said, yeah, well, you guys come perform for our church. Well, I was living in Denver at the time. So we got a series of churches that have lined up that we're going to go perform at, and a college, and a few places. And it was spring break. We had everybody lined up and ready to go. And that evening, after church on a Sunday night, we loaded the big charter buses. And we didn't have room for everybody on the 2 charter buses, so we also got we had a 15-passenger van and a little Ford Bronco to haul everything in. And we took off that evening, and as it can be in Colorado, in springtime, it became bad weather. And it was snowing, and we're taking it along, and we're heading out, and I was riding in the bus, and with a group of kids, and here we go. We got as far as Laramie, Wyoming, pulled over, and one of the drivers in the Bronco, the gal who kind of ran the sound system and all, she was sleeping. And since she was a great lady and had most of the sound equipment, we allowed her to bring her 2 little kids. Kiki, who was at the time I think she was about 7, and she had a little boy who was 5, almost 5. And so she came into the bus, she was feeling sleepy, because it's getting late. It was about 1 in the morning at this point. And I said, no problem, I'll drive. She goes, my kids are asleep in the back seat. Should I just leave them there or bring them in the bus? I said, just leave them, they'll be good. So I grabbed another guy, Dennis, to come kind of be a companion with me as we're driving, because we're going to do an all-nighter. And climbing this, and the buses were going pretty quick. These things are just kind of... So I told the bus driver, I said, you guys just go on ahead. I know you're doing another stop in Evanston, Wyoming. If we trail behind, we'll meet you there. So those buses took off. And we're driving along, and it got about 2 o'clock in the morning, and suddenly I'm coming around a slight turn on the freeway, and the vehicle just kept moving. And we hit some black ice. It wasn't going real fast, maybe 45, but fast enough that we weren't going to stay on the road. So I told Dennis next to me, I said, hang on. And so when we hit off the road, it had been snowing, it was pitch black out, but the ground wasn't frozen, so it was muddy. So we hit, and the front tire went in, and it flipped the vehicle. And we rolled about 3 times. Ended up upside down. And I remember clenching on the steering wheel and letting myself down onto the ceiling now, which is on the ground, and opening the door, and a little dome light came on. And I thought, holy cow. Well, I reached over to Dennis and said, Dennis, we got to get the kids out. And he was unconscious. I shook him a little bit, he came around. I said, you okay? He goes, yeah, my shoulder's stiff, but I think I'm okay. So we got out of the vehicle, and I could hear little Johnny in the back crying. And so we reached over, undid his seatbelt, and got him out. He had a little bit of blood trickling on his head where he bumped it, but it didn't look like it was too major, so that was good. Oh, by the way, in the back of the Bronco was the spotlights and the big speakers and some other things in there that have been now flying around everywhere. And so we were going to get Kiki out, and we couldn't find her. So we started digging through all this equipment, and we couldn't find her. And suddenly I realized the window she was leaning against was out. Obviously, she'd been thrown from the vehicle. Sorry about that. I never like telling the story. Well, so we get out and we start looking. Well, the problem is, after flipping over a few times, we didn't even know what direction we were coming from. Middle lane, there's no lights out. Only thing on the road is trucks, the big semis. And they started pulling over, one after another, which was really cool that they would do that. And they had their lights, and they came in and they're asking what's going on. I said, we're missing a little girl. And so they're walking up and down the median and the freeway looking for her. And we looked, and we looked, and we looked, and finally we just pulled everything we could find out of the vehicle. And she wasn't in there. We couldn't find her. Finally, about 7 or 8 guys, we climbed over and we lifted the vehicle up and moved it, and she was trapped. Didn't know what to do. She was smashed. Her head, everything. Only thing I knew to do was CPR. One of the truck drivers pulled his vehicle right down there, shut his spotlight down, found a piece of wood out of his vehicle, and we put her on it to get her off the cold. And nobody knew how to do CPR. So I did CPR on her for an hour and 20 minutes until help could come. There were about 30-some ones out of Rock Springs. And at first, just not a whole lot of luck, no pulse, no anything. But pretty soon, when I breathed into her, you just hear this gargling sound, And after a while, we'd get her pulse for a little bit, and then it would stop. And we'd get it for a little bit, and it would stop. And this continued. I didn't want to give up. When the ambulance arrived, of course, paramedics had all their equipment, and they put her in the ambulance, and I climbed in the ambulance with her. And we headed to Rock Springs, slid all the way there. And even in the ambulance, they couldn't keep her anywhere close to stable. We saw her Ford Bronco, that 50-passenger van was behind us. Well, they saw the ice because of slipping, and they got off they stayed on the road and pulled off. We kind of watched. I told them to follow us to the hospital. So we get in there, and I go back with the doctors and the nurses, and they begin to work on her. And then pretty soon they excused me to leave that area. So I headed out the waiting room. About every 20 minutes, they would come out with news. First news is they've done the x-rays. Her arm is broken. Her neck looks like it's broken. Major skull damage, hemorrhaging of the brain. They have her on life support to try to keep her alive. So there's nothing else we can do. If she lives, she'll probably be a vegetable. If she can pull through because of the amount of time without oxygen. But they're going to try to airlift her to the Children's Hospital in Salt Lake City. In the meantime, they got on the phone, got with the Sheriff's Department, trying to track down the bus that has them on to get permission to do whatever they need to do. When they finally tracked down the bus, they put the mom in the sheriff's car in every county. They would switch cars, and they raced her all the way to Salt Lake City to be there when the child arrived. The weather was bad, so they had trouble getting the chopper and the plane off the ground for a while, but finally it cleared enough where they got out. They made it to Salt Lake City. The nurses told the mother what to expect, so she wouldn't go into complete shock by all the reports they had. When they got her on the gurney, got her out of the plane, they pulled her into the hospital, and nothing went up beside her. Little Kiki looked up and said, "Mom." took her to the hospital, and all the charts, all the x-rays, everything they sent with her, and they began to run all the tests again. I'll never forget going back in the waiting room, walking to Rock Springs, trying to figure out what we were going to do. Seeing 15 junior high kids on their knees. They ran all the tests. Both collapsed lungs somehow recovered. All the broken bones were healed. They held her for 2 days and let her go. I got the phone call. I'll be honest, I didn't believe it. I mean, I saw her. Quickly as we could, we went to Rock Springs, saw her, and I just could not believe what I was looking at. But you know what? Stories draw emotion, don't they? And I could feel the pain. Yeah. I don't tell that story very often, it hurts. It took me about 6 months to be able to talk about it. But you know what? Stories move people. Out in the road.